Welcome to the Vibrantly You podcast. We're your hosts, Megan Martineau.
Caitlin Cipriano. In this podcast, we talk about fitness and nutrition on your motherhood journey. Whether you're trying to conceive, pregnant, postpartum, or beyond, you're welcome here.
Nothing is off limits, and our goal is to support you in this important season of life so that you can feel vibrantly you. As a reminder, this information is not medical advice. Please see the show notes for more details. Hello, and welcome back to the Vibrantly You podcast. Today, Caitlin and I are going to be diving into a conversation that we both love because it involves one of our favorite things, coffee.
I'm excited to talk about this as always because I know I cannot go without having at least 1 cup of coffee. And I know a lot of moms end up having questions about this. So I think this will be really useful for just about everybody.
Yes, I think this is definitely a big question for how it fits into pregnancy, postpartum, and even when you are weaning, breastfeeding. So, caffeine is such a big part of daily life for so many of us, and it is just really confusing with all these guidelines and how things differ through these different stages of motherhood. So, how about we start with pregnancy and what do moms need to know about caffeine intake during pregnancy?
Yeah, great question. I think this is when it all starts to come up. So, the first general guideline during pregnancy is to keep your caffeine intake under 200 milligrams per day. And this comes from ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians. So, that is roughly the amount that a 12-ounce cup of coffee is going to have. But obviously, this can vary a little bit depending on the type of coffee you have or how it's brewed. So I always suggest if you are unsure here, try researching the brand of coffee that you use at home, or if you are, going out for coffee, try to look and see ahead of time roughly about what you can anticipate because this isn't the only thing, that caffeine is in. It's not just coffee. This is going to include things like teas and sodas, energy drinks, chocolate, even decaf coffee has a little bit of caffeine in it. So it can really add up over the course of your day if you maybe aren't thinking about it. So, again, for example, a cup of green tea might have around 30 milligrams of caffeine, and a bar of dark chocolate could also be somewhere in that 20 to 30 range. So it really is important to think about all of those sources and not just your morning cup of coffee. The reason why that this is something we want to think about during pregnancy is because your body processes caffeine a little bit differently. Your metabolism does slow down, and so the caffeine is staying in your system for a bit longer, as well as baby's system. So, this is important because if you are having high levels of caffeine, it has been linked to things like low birth weight, and then in an early pregnancy, an increased chance of miscarriage. So, that's why this is so important during pregnancy.
Yeah, that's, I think, the point too, that it's in other things and not just coffee, because I do feel like people just tend to think about how much coffee can I have when I'm pregnant? And even like the dark chocolate, like that's a little sneaky way to get caffeine that I feel like a lot of people probably aren't thinking about. And even though it's a small amount, like you said, like 20 to 30 milligrams, it still adds to the total daily intake. I know for myself in pregnancy, and I feel like this is maybe a common experience, like in that first trimester, coffee just like turned my stomach. So I really wasn't having a whole lot of caffeine, I feel like in that first trimester, but then like second trimester, I like really wanted to have coffee again and I was nervous because I was like, oh, I gotta like stay, in this range. But it is good to know that we have to look at everything, the tea, the soda, energy drinks. Are energy drinks safe in pregnancy? I feel like that's another question that comes up.
I don't typically recommend it during pregnancy just because so many of them either do have those higher levels, like a lot of energy drinks are already in the 200 to 300 milligram range. So that alone would be all that you could have. but a lot of them have extra added ingredients that are also not recommended or safe during pregnancy. So I typically just recommend people to stay away from them altogether when they're pregnant.
Yeah, and I feel like that's really important to know because a lot of people do like their energy drinks. And maybe if they're like, oh, well, it's still in that range, just also thinking about the additives that are in there as well, like you said.
Yeah.
So for moms like us who do really love coffee, maybe drink too much coffee, but want to cut back in pregnancy, what are some like good swaps that they could do that are still going to keep them in this range?
Yeah, so I think the great thing here is that you have options. You don't have to just be like, I started off with 2 to 3 cups of coffee and now I can't have anything. I think that all or nothing mindset kind of comes in here, especially when you take away something like coffee that tends to be like a joyful moment in people's day. I know I feel that way. And so thinking about, okay, maybe you do need to decrease some, but we can bring some other things in that may help. So, teas like rooibos or dandelion root are naturally caffeine free, but they also have sort of a similar, like rich, earthy profile like coffee has. So, you can consider doing a half calf, or you can try a decaf coffee. Maybe you still really want to have 2 cups. So, you can do, one regular and one decaf, or 2 half calves, which is personally what I chose to do. So I could still have 1 to 2 cups of coffee, which is my normal ritual, but I was just having half the amount of caffeine so I could sort of keep the same volume that I was used to having, because it is like a joyful ritual. It's that moment of calm and normalcy, I feel like, for a lot of people. And so I think trying to keep that in without much disruption is what we want to aim for.
Now, I know that generally it's not recommended to drink coffee on an empty stomach. Do you think that that's even more important during pregnancy to make sure that you are having that morning cup of coffee with some food?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and I don't remember what episode, maybe the blood sugar balance
Yeah.
episode. We talked about this very briefly, maybe, but when you have coffee on an empty stomach, it does act as an appetite suppressant. And so you may have this experience where, and maybe you're dealing with nausea on top of this, but you get to, you wake up, you have your coffee, and all of a sudden you're not hungry until like 10 or 11 p.m. And now your blood sugar levels have dropped, if your energy is starting to tank. So if we can avoid some of this, keep blood sugar levels more balanced, they're going to in turn help keep your energy levels more balanced. So I'm really glad you brought the nutrition piece into the mix here. We should definitely try our best to incorporate a meal, within about an hour of waking up. And if you are experiencing a lot of nausea, morning sickness, you may want to try to eat something even sooner than this, even if it's not your full breakfast. Just having like a few crackers or something that you can get in your stomach to help prevent some of that immediate morning nausea, if that's something you're experiencing.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip and also making sure you're drinking water with your coffee.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah, so I think those are really great tips for pregnancy and just keeping in mind that range, stay in there, be mindful of those other sources of caffeine that can creep in throughout the day. But let's move on to postpartum. So I also feel like this is a time when many moms are like, that first cup of coffee is non-negotiable, especially with sleep deprivation and just wanting to like feel normal again. But if you are someone who is lactating and you are breastfeeding, there are some limits there. And I think maybe sometimes people forget about this. So let's talk about what the limit is for postpartum if you are breastfeeding.
Yeah, so there's still some considerations that we want to take into account for breastfeeding moms because caffeine does pass into breast milk. Generally, it's a really small amount, it's less than 1% of what you consume. And for most babies, this really is not much of a problem. However, you may get a baby that is more sensitive to caffeine, and their bodies do still take longer to process it. So I'll talk about some things you can look out for with this, but the general recommendation is to stay under 300 milligrams while you're breastfeeding. So this gives you a little bit more flexibility than during pregnancy. But again, if you notice your baby is fussy or restless, maybe they're having trouble sleeping, it could be worth experimenting on cutting back your caffeine to see if that helps. Your timing can make a big difference here too. If you have your coffee right after a feeding, there's going to be time for caffeine to work through your system before your next nursing session. This can definitely minimize how much your baby is exposed to. I know for me, I picked up on this with my son. Just he had some of those things I noticed after I had a cup of coffee. And so um, the timing of when I would have it absolutely made a difference in him being, like, fussy or gassy. However, with my daughter, my second, it like, nothing she didn't really deal with much of that, and so it didn't seem to make much of a difference when I was having my coffee. So, trust your gut here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip about the timing and how that can be helpful if your baby is sensitive. I know for me, with my son, my first baby, I exclusively pumped. And so I mean, to be honest, with either kid, I didn't really notice either one of them being sensitive to caffeine. But for him, I did try to be mindful of labeling my pumped milk too. So if I was pumping in the morning, especially after having a cup of coffee, I would label that as morning milk. So that way I wasn't giving him milk that potentially had caffeine in it right before bed at night. So, and I've heard of other pumping moms doing this as well. Or if you were doing like a pitcher method with pumped milk, trying to combine all the milk from the day and then it's all mixed together, and that will also like lessen potentially any caffeine that might be in there. But that was something I tried to do. It was like, okay, morning milk stays for the morning. And then evening milk is before bed, just in case he was sensitive. Like I said, I didn't notice a difference. And then for my daughter, I did nurse her, and same thing. I didn't necessarily notice anything, but I would try to wait and have at least my first cup of coffee until after I had fed her, just in case. So if there are moms who find that their baby is really sensitive to caffeine and they have to cut it out, whether that's, in their sleeping or their digestive systems, or if it's just not working for mom in general, do you have nutrition tips for them where they can naturally boost their energy without relying on caffeine?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think those are good points too for pumping with the timing, just being able to be mindful and label what you're doing, so thank you for sharing those too, and our energy levels are not just about caffeine, and this goes for everybody, but particularly if you're finding that you do have to either significantly cut down or baby is not tolerating it at all, like you've ruled other things out, and that's the part that is bothering them. We want to think about keeping our blood sugar balanced. And so this really does take our nutrition into consideration. So we want to think about our including proteins, healthy fats, fiber alongside our carbohydrates. So this is going to help keep your energy levels more stable. When our blood sugar levels are more balanced, our energy levels are going to be more balanced too. We're not dealing with really big spikes or really big drops in things. So if you wanna think about a couple examples here, something like a snack where you've got, like, a boiled egg with some avocado, maybe some crackers, and then or a handful of nuts with your apple. This can go a long way to keeping you fueled. You're gonna feel satisfied for a longer period of time, and you're also, again, generally gonna have much more stable blood sugar levels, which makes your energy levels much more stable as well. And if you need some more ideas here too, you can check out my ebook on postpartum nutrition on the website. I have some recipes in here alongside education that you probably would find helpful, and we can link those in the show notes. But additionally, outside of food, just staying hydrated is so critical during this time, in particular when you are breastfeeding. But again, whether you are doing that via pumping or you are exclusively nursing, dehydration can make you feel even more exhausted. So consider, adding electrolytes into one of your water bottles for the day. These minerals can also just add a big boost. So if you notice your energy levels are tanking a bit in the afternoon, you could try adding some electrolytes in here to help with your hydration. Meg and I both love the brand Ultima. They have some really great flavors. This is not a sponsor, but both of us are brand ambassadors. And if you do choose to check out the link in the show notes, we would receive a small commission. If you are feeling particularly run down, like you feel like your energy levels are not where you would anticipate for them to be, and you feel like you're getting adequate levels of sleep, this could be a time to reach out to your provider, get some blood work done, see where your iron levels are. Sometimes we can struggle with anemia postpartum, get your vitamin D levels and B vitamins checked. Those can all really contribute to energy levels. So, if you're feeling like your fatigue is beyond what you would anticipate for it to be, depending where you are in your postpartum journey, go check with your provider.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, not just assuming that you're super tired because you're not drinking coffee, but just really being aware of your body and what's going on. And if it's something more than just caffeine withdrawal, to definitely go get it checked out. So,
Yeah,
when it
absolutely.
comes to weaning, so you've been breastfeeding, it's time to wean. You're done breastfeeding, can you, and say you're someone even who like wasn't drinking coffee at all during breastfeeding, is it safe to go back to just drinking as much caffeine as you want?
I would say that depends what amount your body was used to having. If you haven't been drinking caffeine or you limited it quite a bit during pregnancy and or postpartum, then you may notice after you bring it back in that it makes you feel jittery or anxious because your body is just not used to that amount. You've decreased that tolerance in your load. So you may want to start this progressively as far as your intake goes. Maybe you start with, half a cup and add on from there, or you do 1 cup of coffee and 1 cup of tea, see how you feel as you add this back in. Pay attention to how it affects your sleep as well. It might be disruptive of your own rest if you're drinking it later in the day. I mean, that goes for anybody really, but just pay attention to how you're noticing it's impacting you as you bring it back in. And ideally, you're able to let wean kind of slowly and progressively here too, just to help with how your hormones are shifting during this time when you're stopping lactating, because it can, if you are having to do it suddenly, which I know some people do need to do, it can be a lot, a lot. And so if you are having to wean more abruptly, you may wanna wait until things, like, settle down for yourself before you add something new in the mix, but if you've been dropping feeds pretty slowly and you've ended things, when you and baby are ready to stop your journey, I generally think it's okay to kind of bring that level back up to what you have been doing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that there's a big hormone shift when you're weaning too. And I know that that can bring on some postpartum depression or anxiety, even though people think of those things happening just in the early postpartum days, it can happen later on. And obviously, a lot of caffeine can increase anxiety. So just being aware of that, like you said, and just trying to be mindful as you're going through this transition for sure. So, what are some other ways? I know we kind of talked about this before, but what are some other ways that moms can try to boost their energy during this weaning phase, especially if they are like not wanting to go back to caffeine or really wanting to limit it?
Yeah, I think continuing nutrition-wise, with what we talked about, trying to have balanced meals with plenty of protein, healthy fiber, fats, and also movement is a really great way to boost
Yes.
energy, especially if you can get outside, even if it is just a 10-minute walk, it can make a huge difference. Just natural light, air, the momentum of movement can really impact and give you, again, a little boost in your energy. It's we're recording this right now in January and it's quite cold in a lot of places. So if you can't get outside, I think a walking pad is also a great investment. I think you have one too. But just being able to after a meal, even just walk on the walking pad for 10 minutes, it can make a big difference on your outlook if you have the time. And also, if you are feeling run down, overwhelmed, maybe you are weaning and you're just feeling a lot of shifts, don't underestimate a nap. Sometimes that like best thing you can do is just prioritize rest. So if you can swing it, I know it's hard sometimes, but rest is also important.
Yeah, I think really listening to your body during this time is, I feel like that's kind of something that's been the theme of this episode, Like if you notice you're extremely tired, like abnormally so, go get it checked out. If you're like really tired and you need to rest, try to do that. If you're like, okay, movement would help me, try to do that. I think overall, most of us don't want to rely on caffeine for energy, but so like having these other tools to access, especially if it's during a time like pregnancy or breastfeeding when we do need to limit caffeine, can be really helpful. So to kind of sum things up, during pregnancy, we want to aim for less than 200 milligrams of caffeine per day. Remember that caffeine doesn't just come from coffee, it can be tea and chocolate and all those other things. For postpartum, specifically when you are lactating or breastfeeding, stay mindful of your baby's sensitivity, the timing of when you're consuming caffeine and intake, and then during that weaning process, if you do want to get back to your regular caffeine consumption, try to slowly ease back into it rather than just, going into the deep end and focus on bringing in some of those tools for sustainable energy with nutrition and lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think throughout each of them, yes, there are definitely limits that have been really well researched that we want to follow. But like you said, we don't caffeine, I think, should be this, again, place of enjoyment, like coffee, tea, chocolate. Those are all really enjoyable things, and they can absolutely fit into what we're doing. But we also want to have these other tools in our toolbox that are going to really make a difference in how we feel and our energy levels. We can't rely on the actual caffeine itself to determine how we feel and our energy. So think about it as finding a balance that works for both you and for your baby. And also, these are tough shifts going through pregnancy, postpartum, ending your breastfeeding journeys. Be gentle. and it's okay to make adjustments as you go.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. Just adjust as you go for sure. So, thank you so much, Caitlin, for all of this information. It was really helpful. And if you found this episode helpful today, make sure you share it with a mom friend or a pregnant friend who also loves her coffee. As always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can DM us on Instagram. My handle is Vibrant Mama Wellness, and Caitlin's is Wholesome Huntress Nutrition. And if you have any topics that you want us to cover, definitely send us a message with those as well. We would be happy to add them in. And we will talk to you next week.